To make dolls come alive. Name them. It all started at the big market. My niece Maya loves all kinds of junk. That day, she got her hands on a dusty, tattered box. It was an old puppet theater set, probably from the 30s. The old packaging had pictures of weird, cheerful, almost manic paper dolls on it. It was called The Magnificent Scene of Wonders. Corny, right? And I tried to talk her into buying a cute porcelain doll, but Maya threw a fit. Well, you know how it is with kids, so for $5, The Magnificent Scene of Wonders became ours. We went back to my apartment. I stayed with it all week, while my sister and her mother were away on business. My apartment is a typical one-bedroom apartment in an old building. We dumped the contents of the box right on the living room carpet. Inside was a folding cardboard stage, slightly warped with age, and a stack of thick, glossy cards. Each card had a doll on it. There was Mr. Hee Hee, a clown with a smile that was, well, too wide. Lily Ann, a girl with empty, glassy eyes. Officer Varchun, a policeman with a perpetually furrowed brow, and a silent jester, whose face was completely smooth, just a white oval. There were about 10 of them in all. Maya was delighted. Let's play. Auntie Hoya. Come on, let's play. Okay. Come on, little one. I laughed. Just let me figure out the rules. I picked up the thin, yellowed booklet. It was mostly boring instructions for assembling the stage, but on the very first page, in handwriting, was one phrase. It was underlined in red ink. To make the dolls come to life, call them by name. I read it out loud, and chuckled at how dramatic it sounded. Maya's eyes widened. They could come to life? For real? No, sweetie, I told her. It's pretend. For a game. To make it more fun. But she had already started playing. She picked up the cards, one by one. Her little fingers traced the drawn faces. This is Mr. Hee Hee, she announced solemnly. And this is Lily Ann and Officer Warchin, and the silent jester. She whispered the last name. We named them all. It was a silly, funny game. We set the scene in her temporary bedroom, in my little office, and the cards with the dolls were placed on the nightstand. She played for a while, speaking for them in funny voices, and then she got tired. We had dinner and watched cartoons, and by 9 o'clock, she was already asleep. I checked on her, tucked a blanket around her. As usual, I left the door to her room ajar. I returned to the living room, poured myself a glass of wine, and settled down on the couch with a book. The old house was quiet, except for the familiar hum of pipes, and the distant hum of city traffic. I must have dozed off. I woke suddenly. The apartment was pitch dark, broken only by the dim orange glow of a street lamp. The book fell to the floor. My neck was stiff. I glanced at the clock on my phone. 3:17, the witching hour. Excellent. And then I heard a whisper. It was so quiet I thought I was imagining it. Maybe pages were turning, or the old house was settling. But then the sound came again, a soft, hissing murmur from the direction of Maya's room. My heart pounded in panic. I held my breath, straining to hear. Silence. I told myself I was being paranoid. A glass of wine. Sleeping on the couch. Of course I was sleepy. I stood up and tiptoed to the door, peering through the crack. The room was dark, but I could just make out her small figure in bed. She was fast asleep, and then I saw it. On the nightstand, next to the lamp, was a deck of cards with dolls on them. They were arranged differently. I was sure I'd left them in a neat stack. Now they were laid out in a perfect semicircle, and on top, face up, lay Mr. Hee Hee. His painted smile seemed to glitter in the moonlight. A cold, heavy fear squeezed my stomach. It must be Maya. I woke up, played, and fell asleep again. Children do strange things. I tried to convince myself of that. I lay awake for what seemed like an eternity, staring at the ceiling. Every groan of the corpse made me shudder. The next day, Maya didn't say a word to me about the cards. She was as cheerful as usual. We went to the park, ate ice cream, and last night's anxiety began to seem like a ridiculous dream. When we got home, I went sneaking around in her room. The cards were again lying in a neat stack, only now there was another card on top. Lily Ann with her empty, tired eyes. I felt uneasy. Maya did it. Hey! Hey, Maya! I called. Were you playing with your dolls this morning? She ran into the room shaking her head. No. Can we play now? I hesitated for a second, then forced a smile. Of course. We played for a while. I spoke for the physician officer, she for Lily Ann. Everything seemed normal, but later that night, as I was putting her to bed, she said something that made my blood run cold. She was brushing her teeth and humming a tune. Then she stopped, looked at my reflection in the bathroom mirror, and said to me, Mr. Hee Hee doesn't like the physician officer. He told me. I stared at her. What do you mean? It's a game. Dolls don't talk. They do. She said it in a completely casual tone. They talk when you're not there. They whisper from cards. I didn't sleep that night. I was sitting on the couch in the dark. Around 2 in the morning, the whispering started again. This time, it wasn't just one voice. It was a chorus of quiet, rustling sounds. I couldn't make out the words, but the intonation was ominous. I wanted to rush in there, grab those cards and burn them, but I was paralyzed by fear. What if I open the door, and they are more than just cards? What if Maya is talking back? The whispering stopped abruptly, around 4 in the morning. The next day it got worse. I was in the kitchen, making dinner, when I suddenly heard a loud knock coming from Maya's room. I ran in, my heart pounding. Maya was sitting on the floor drawing. She was fine, but the cardboard scene was scattered on the floor, and Officer Grumpy's card was lying in the center, face down. The rest of the cards were still on the nightstand. What happened, Maya? I asked. She looked up at me. He fell. Just, she said. Mr. Hee Hee pushed him. That night I decided I had enough. My sister was coming back in 2 days. I couldn't let this go on. As soon as Maya fell asleep, I was going to take those cards and throw them in the trash. I waited until midnight. The apartment was quiet. Taking a deep breath, I grabbed the flashlight and went into her room. I pushed the door carefully, The whispering hadn't started yet. The cards with the dolls were fanned out on the nightstand again, but this time they were arranged around one central card, the silent jester. Cards with a blank white oval, where their faces should be. As soon as the beam of my flashlight touched the cards, I heard, this time not a whisper, a clear child's voice, right next to me. It's time to play, Auntie. I turned around abruptly, shining the flashlight into the corner of the room. Nothing. Maya was still asleep in her bed. My blood ran cold. The voice wasn't Maya's. It came from right next to me. It was Lillian's voice. The same one Maya used during the game. Who's there? I whispered. A soft laughter echoed through the room. Tall manic Mr. Hee-Hee. Then, from the nightstand, I heard Officer Grumpy's low growl. The beam of my flashlight flickered, dancing across the walls. I felt a presence in the room. A crowd of invisible beings watching me. The air grew thick, cold. I felt their gaze. I slowly backed away. My hand fumbled for the doorknob. My fingers wouldn't obey. Slippery with sweat. I just wanted to get out, to escape. As my hand closed on the handle, a whisper began, like a cacophony of voices from all directions. And in the midst of it all, a new sound. A soft scratching. I forced myself to look at the nightstand again. The flashlight beam fell on the central card. The silent jester, a thin dark line, appeared on the empty white oval of his face. He was drawing himself. A smile. A wide, unnatural smile. A wave of terror washed over me. These creatures weren't just whispering. They weren't just moving cards. They were feeding on something. On our attention. Our fear. Yes, in Ming's name. It was as if we had signed a contract. Invited them in. The game is over. I screamed. My voice broke. The whispering stopped. The scratching too. The smile on the jester's face was complete. And then the last voice rang out. It wasn't a whisper. It was a clear, calm, adult voice that sounded from every corner of the room. The game is never over. It said. We're just beginning. I opened the door, and took off running. I didn't stop until I was out of the house. The next day, while Maya was at a friend's, I packed all of her things, and never set foot in that apartment again. I broke the lease, paid the fine, and moved across town. My sister, of course, didn't believe me. She thinks I had some kind of nervous breakdown. Maya remembers almost nothing, only that Aunt Chloe got scared by a stupid game. But sometimes, late at night, when the house is quiet, I hear it, a barely perceptible sound, so soft I can almost convince myself it's just the wind, a whisper, and I know they remember me. I gave them names. I gave them a voice, and somewhere out there in the darkness, they're still waiting for someone else to find their box, read their rules, open the stage. They are patient. After all, the game never ends. They just wait for new players, and they have an eternity to play. Every morning, my family plays a strange game. I thought it was just a stupid joke, until I lost it yesterday. It was our family tradition. For as long as I can remember, we started every morning neither with coffee nor with the news. We'd sit at the kitchen table, and Mom would pull out an old battered box. There were no playing cards inside. They were thick and yellowish cardboard, and on each pair were drawn strange, slightly creepy symbols, a broken cup, eyeless birds, a lone lantern in the fog, a door that was just ajar so you couldn't see anything behind it. The rules were ridiculously simple, like a children's game. The cards were laid out face down and we'd take turns turning over two at a time trying to find a pair. Find one. You move again. Make a mistake. Move on to the next player. We'd play until there were no cards left on the table. The one with the most pairs won, but there was one main, unbreakable rule. The one that made me hate this game. The loser had to remain silent all day. Not just try to talk less, but actually remain silent. Not make a sound. Until the next morning. If you were spoken to, you could nod or shake your head. And that was it. For me, a 16-year-old boy, it was torture. My younger sister, Katya, was a damn genius at this game. She almost always won. Dad played calmly, and often came in second. Mom just watched the proceedings with some strange smile, as if it wasn't a game, but a sacred ritual. Lesha, your turn, she said, her voice quiet but insistent. I always played half-heartedly, trying to end this circus as quickly as possible. Seriously, it's the 21st century, and here we are playing in a picture with scribbles, and this rule of silence. When I was little, I lost a couple of times, and it was terrible. You're like a mute all day at school. Friends joke, and you just smile like an idiot. The teacher asks, you struggle with something and get a bad grade. But the last few years, I've been somehow lucky. I wasn't the best, but there was always someone who scored lower. Until yesterday. Yesterday, everything was going as usual. We were sitting at the table, the cards laid out. I was already mentally packing my backpack, and thinking about how after school, the guys and I would go to the abandoned building. The game began. Katya, as always, on the very first move revealed paired cards, a crooked tree, then some more, a sunken key. That damn witch with a photographic memory. Dad found a broken mirror. Mom an empty swing. My turn. I lazily turned over two cards. 1, 2, missed. It was my sister's turn. I wasn't paying much attention to the count. I just wanted it to be over. But when the last pair of cards remained on the table, I suddenly realized I had 0. 0 pairs. Katya had 6. Dad had 4. Mom had 2. I lost. Well, Lesha, Mom said in her usual calm voice. See you tomorrow. Katya giggled. Dad silently got up and went to get ready for work. Anger boiled inside me. Not childish resentment, but real teenage rage. What the hell? I'm 16. I'm not going to play these childish games and keep quiet all day because of a stupid tradition. Yes. Now. I muttered under my breath as Mom turned back to the stove. Forgive me what? She turned around. I looked her straight in the eyes and said loudly and clearly, I'm telling you, I won't keep quiet. This is stupid. Mom looked at me. Her face didn't show any anger or surprise. It was blank. She just stared, then blinked and turned back to the stove, as if I hadn't said anything to her. Dad. I shouted at my father, who was already standing in the hallway. Did you hear? I won't play the silent game. He looked at me. Or rather, not at me. As if I was nothing. He didn't answer. Just put on his shoes and left the apartment. Slamming the door. Katya, he said. But you tell them. I turned to my sister. She was sitting at the table, finishing her pancake, staring at her phone. She didn't even raise her head, as if my voice simply didn't exist. Okay, I thought. Great, boycott then. Well then, let's see who wins. I held out for the first couple of hours, walking around the apartment, listening to loud music on my headphones, slamming the door. No reaction. They moved around the house, doing their own thing, talking to each other, but I wasn't there for them. By lunchtime, I was starting to feel uneasy. Anxiety was starting to erode my confidence. I walked up to my mother, who was washing the dishes, and stood right in front of her. Mom, stop it. This isn't funny anymore. She continued washing the plate, sipping something under her breath. I got angry, and decided to take extreme measures. I reached out to grab her shoulder, to force it back, and my fingers passed through her. I pulled my hand back, as if from fire, my heart pounding somewhere in my throat. Cold sweat broke out on my back. What was that? There was no sensation of flesh. It was as if I was running my hand through a thick, cold fog. I tried again. Carefully, I brought my finger to her back. It sank in without any resistance. Panic began to flood my consciousness. I rushed to Katya, who was sitting in her room watching some TV series. Katya, help. Something is wrong. I tried to grab her by the shoulder. The same effect. My hand passed right through her. She didn't even flinch. I darted around the apartment, like a caged animal, trying to touch things. The table was hard under my palms. The table too. But my family, they were ghosts to me. Or had I become a ghost to them? I ran to the mirror in the hallway and screamed. Quietly. Stifled. Because the scream was stuck in my throat. I wasn't there. The mirror reflected the hallway, the door to the room, the clothes rack. But not me. Emptiness. I grabbed my phone from the table, wanting to call friends. Anyone. But as soon as I picked it up, it became translucent to my hand. And I dropped it. It didn't fall. It simply passed through my palm and hit the floor with a dull thud. I sat on the floor in my room for the rest of the day. I watched the sun set outside the window. I heard my father come home from work. How they ate dinner, laughed, watched TV. They talked about anything. About the weather, the news, their plans for the weekend. But my name was never mentioned. My place at the table was empty, and no one paid attention to it, as if I had never existed. And I was erased. I don't know if I slept that night. More likely, I simply passed out and for a while fell into a viscous, anxious, dreamless emptiness. When I woke up, the hallway was quiet. There was no longer panic inside me, only a cold, ringing cordon. I got up and wandered to the kitchen. I was drawn there like a winder to a flame. I had to see what would happen next. In the kitchen, a dim nightlight, and a table were on. The table was set for three plates, 3 cups, 3 places of cutlery. My place was gone. The table where I sat every day for 16 years, it had simply disappeared. The space between Mom and Caddy's chairs widened slightly, as if that's how it should be. In the middle of the table lay a familiar worn box, and next to it, where my plate should have been, lay a single card, face up. I walked closer, my heart clenching like a lump of ice. It was a new card. I'd never seen it before. A face stared back at me from it, distorted, drawn in the same eerie style as the other symbols, but unmistakably recognizable. It was my face, pale skin, eyes wide with terror, mouth frozen in a horrified scream. I stared at my portrait, and the world around me shrank to this small piece of cardboard. So this is what happens to losers. They don't just remain silent, they become part of the game, erased from reality to make room. The front door clicked softly and opened, and I turned around. My parents and Katya were standing at the threshold. They didn't enter the apartment. They were standing in the doorway, looking at someone behind them. Come in. Don't be afraid, Mom said kindly, a tone she never used with me. We've been waiting for you. And a guy, about my age, maybe a little younger, stepped into the apartment. Confused, scared. He was dressed in shabby jeans and an old jacket. Where am I? He whispered. Are you home from the start? Dad smiled. He put his hand on his shoulder, and his hand didn't go all the way through. You're home now. My family sat him down on a chair. Dad's chair. And Dad sat on Mom's chair. Mom sat on Katya's chair. And Katya sat in the new empty seat, opposite the card with my face on it. Good morning, Mom said, opening the box and pouring the cards onto the table. Her gaze slid over the new guy, then over Katya, then over Dad. She smiled her eerie, calm smile. It's time to begin. We have a new player today. She began shuffling the cards. A broken cup, eyeless birds, a lonely lantern, and among them, I caught a glimpse of mine. His face twisted with horror. I stood in the corner of my former kitchen and watched as my family and some stranger began a new game. I wanted to scream, to rush at them, to stop this madness, but I couldn't. I was just a spectator, a ghost in my own house, another symbol of the cursed deck, and I waited in horror to see which of them would lose today, and whose face would appear on the new card tomorrow morning. Mom said there would be 8 days this week, and on the 8th day, you can't leave your room. Well, she said, it happens to everyone. She's tired from work. She's my doctor. She sees all sorts of things. That's why she gets tongue-tied. I mumbled something in response, like yeah, okay mom, and then forgot about it. But that evening, passing the kitchen for another cup of tea, I paused at the door. My mother had said the same thing to my father, only now her voice was different. A quiet, tense whisper, filled with panic. 8 days, do you understand? The 8th is almost here. We need to get ready. My father was silent for a long moment, and then I heard him sigh heavily. A sort of resigned sigh. That's what happens when arguing is useless, and all you can do is resign yourself to it. That sigh scared me more than my mother's words. On Monday morning, the strangeness continued. On our burp calendar hanging in the hallway, another day appeared after Sunday. It was a crookedly taped sheet of paper from a grid notebook, and on it, written in my mother's neat but shaky handwriting, was a single letter. Ja. Not Monday too. Not an extra day, but simply ja. I stood there, looking at that letter, and a chill ran down my spine. It no longer seemed like a funny slip of the tongue. Mom, what is this? I asked when she came out into the hallway. She looked at the calendar, then at me, and answered with frightening calm, as if explaining the nudity chart to a first grader. Day 8. I told you so. I went to my father. He was sitting in the living room, simply staring at the dark TV screen. Dad, did you see? What's with the calendar? He slowly turned his head. His eyes were tired. Listen, Vanya's mom. Just do what she says. I turned back to the black rectangle of the screen. I decided I was slowly losing my mind. Or at least they were. At school I'd ask my friends if they thought the week was somehow wrong too long. They'd look at me like I was a complete idiot. Everyone had a normal 7-day week on their phones, in their electronic diaries, in their heads. But at home, the world was slowly falling apart. My parents had almost stopped talking to each other. They tiptoed around the apartment, as if afraid to disturb a singing predator. The sounds had become different, muffled, viscous, as if the air had thickened. I dropped a fork in the kitchen. It landed on the tiles with a soft thud, as if on a carpet, and I turned on the water to wash my hands, and the stream flowed lazily, reluctantly, like syrup. On Wednesday, my father dragged some old boards and a toolbox out of the storage room. Silently, without looking at anyone, he started tinkering. On Thursday, I realized he was boarding up the windows. Not all of them, just the ones in my room. Dad, what's wrong? I screamed as he placed the first board against my window. He grabbed my shoulders so hard and growled in my face, the scent of fear filling him. It has to be that way. For 8 days, the light mustn't see what's happening in this house. His eyes were wild, and I fell silent. On Saturday, the final preparations began. My mother turned my room into some kind of bunker, but she also brought 5-liter bottles of water, canned goods, bags of crackers, flashlights, and batteries. My father brought an old hunting rifle from his safe, the kind I'd only seen a couple of times in my life. He sat with it in the corner of my room, placed it on his knees, and froze, turning into an eerie statue. The atmosphere in the apartment was permeated with more than just fear. It was a wild terror of something for which there was no name in human language. Not a hurricane, not a maniac, not a war, something much worse, something wrong. On Sunday evening, when the sun had almost set, my mother came into my room. My father was still sitting in the corner, motionless. She hugged me tightly and whispered in my ear, Vanechka, listen carefully. Tomorrow, when daylight comes, no matter what you hear, be silent behind the door. Don't make a sound. Try not to even breathe. We will be here in the apartment, but we will not be us. Do you understand? I didn't understand anything, but I nodded, because there was so much pleading and despair in her voice that it was impossible to argue about crimes. She left, closing the door tightly behind her. I heard the key turn in the lock from outside. I was locked in. I am my petrified father with a gun, a supply of food, and a boarded-up window. I lay down on my bed, still dressed, and stared at the ceiling. I waited for the 8th day. I don't know at what point Sunday flowed into this new alien day. I think I finally fell asleep and woke up to silence. Not the usual silence, the kind where you can hear the refrigerator humming and the clock ticking. This was a vacuum, the absolute absence of any sound. I sat up in bed, my heart pounding. My father was sitting in the same corner, in the same position, and waved cautiously. No reaction. He didn't even blink at me. Dad, I joked. The sound of my voice didn't echo off the walls. He simply drowned, absorbed into this dead silence. And then I heard it. The sound from the bathtub. Dripping water. But the sound was inside out. Not drip drip, but the opposite. Like a film being played backwards. A short rising sound. Pack. Pack. I went cold. The water dripped upward. I tiptoed to the door and pressed my ear to the wood. Behind the door, a quiet rustling sound was heard in the apartment, as if someone were slowly dragging heavy furniture. And then I heard my mother's voice. She repeated the same phrase over and over, monotonously, without intonation, like a robot. He won't find us if we act like furniture. That lifeless voice made my hair stand on end. Who is he? Why pretend to be furniture? I carefully pressed the door handle. Locked. Fear warred within me with desperate curiosity. I stepped away from the door and looked at the boarded-up window. There was a tiny gap, no more than a centimeter, between the two boards my father had used to cover the frame. No sunlight came through, but I had to look. I had to. I dragged a chair to the window and climbed onto it. I wished I hadn't. There was no sky. The familiar blues and gray clouds, none of that was there. It occupied all visible space. Something endless. Alive. The color of pale human skin. It stretched from horizon to horizon. Smooth, slightly flat, and giant bluish veins slowly pulsated across its surface. They looked like veins. I stared, unable to tear myself away, unable even to breathe. This was not an illusion, not an atmospheric phenomenon. This was flesh, skin, and as I stared, this skin blinked. A giant fold in the horizon slowly sank down, momentarily obscuring the world, and then rose just as majestically and silently. I recoiled from the window, nearly falling to the floor. I was shaking. I glanced at my father. He hadn't moved. He knew what was there. Everything behind the door went silent. My mother's voice fell silent. The rustling stopped, and in that silence I heard footsteps, heavy, leisurely, right at my door. The sound was muffled, as if they were walking not on our floor, but on something somehow soft. The footsteps stopped. I froze, holding my breath. An eerie sound rang out, slow, drawn out, as if someone were running something sharp along the outside of my door, leaving a deep furrow, and I imagined a huge knuckle. The scraping stopped and a voice rang out. It didn't sound from outside. It was born right inside my head. There were no words in it, only images. Deep dark water, cold, empty spaces between dead stars, and a feeling of hunger, ancient as the universe itself. A voice in my head asked a silent question that I understood without translation. Are you there? I dug my hands into my hair, covering my mouth to keep from screaming. It was him, the one my mother was hiding from, the one my father was waiting for with a gun. I know you're there, I joked again in my mind. Your parents are fine furniture. They hardly make a sound. But you're alive. You're afraid. Your fear is so bright. It glows in this silence, like a small flame. I saw the wooden handle begin to turn slowly. The handle turned with unbearable, agonizing slowness. The lock on the outside didn't click. The mechanism simply didn't work, as if for someone on the other side. Our human inventions, like locks, were just a ridiculous misunderstanding. Open, a voice whispered in my head. No need to be afraid. I just want to see. You're so warm. And at that moment my father stirred. Very slowly, as if breaking invisible shackles, he began to raise the gun. He wasn't looking at the door. He was looking straight at me, and there was a desperate plea in his eyes. Be quiet. Don't react. Disappear. I get it. This creature doesn't feed on flesh. It feeds on attention, emotions, fear. Mom, who became furniture. Dad, who turned into a statue. They tried to become invisible to him, uninteresting, and I was a beacon for him. A bright, panicked, delicious beacon. The handle turned all the way. The door creaked open inward, by itself. I see you. I see your heart pounding. I see your thoughts. I haven't looked at this world in so long. And something appeared from the dark crevice. Not a hand. Not a finger. A thin, absolutely black, shiny appendage. It slowly, almost curiously, seeped into the room, and stretched towards me, thrashing in the air like a worm. And then my father fired. The deafening roar in the vacuum of the room was tantamount to an explosion, and the skin returned to the wall with a sonic wave. My father was thrown into his corner. The black appendage in the doorway twitched, and a sound came from the apartment that seemed self-real, with a vulgar crackle. The door slammed with such force that plaster fell from the ceiling, and the voice in my head exploded with a single phrase. The furniture doesn't fire, and it was all over. As suddenly as it had begun, sounds returned to the world, at first timidly, then louder. I heard the hum of the refrigerator, the tick of a clock, the noise of a car passing outside the window. Ordinary, familiar, infinitely beautiful sounds of life. I jumped up and rushed to my father. He was lying in the eye of a heavily breathing man. The gun was lying nearby. We made it. He wheezed, opening his eyes. We sat in the room until the morning, not daring to go out. Mom opened the door. She looked as if she had aged 20 years. She said nothing. She just silently hugged first my father, then me. Words were not needed. There was usually a calendar hanging on the wall in the kitchen. After Sunday came Monday. The page with the letter J was gone. It simply disappeared, as if it had never been. We never spoke of this day again. We pretended that it never happened. We tried to move on with our lives. But for me, the world will never be the same. I can no longer calmly look at the sky. Every time I see pink clouds at sunset, I look for bluish veins in them. I shudder when it becomes too quiet in the house. Sometimes, very rarely, I wake up in the middle of the night from an icy the feeling that someone is watching me. Not from behind the window, not from behind the door, from there, from that side. And then, in the very depths of consciousness, I hear a quiet whisper. Interesting furniture. Noisy. I need to go back, take a closer look. And I lie motionless until dawn, not even daring to breathe, and repeat to myself like a mantra. He won't find me if I act like furniture. But I know he will come back. And I am deathly afraid of the day when an extra page with the letter J appears on our calendar again, and I will act like furniture.